The General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon is one of the world's most popular fighter aircraft. It has earned its wings both in the Cold War and more recent hot ones. It has been in combat during Desert Storm and in the skies over Bosnia. The General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon is one of the most significant fighters of the latter part of the 20th century. It was originally developed from a concept for an experimental lightweight fighter and has evolved into an all-weather fighter and precision attack aircraft. The F-16 has been manufactured on as many as 5 separate production lines, making it the largest fighter program in the Western world. Over 4,000 F-16s have been built, with production still continuing. As early as 1965, the Air Force had begun concept formulation studies of new high-performance fighters. These included the FX, a heavy interceptor air superiority fighter, and the lightweight advanced day fighter, ADF. The appearance of the Mach 2.8 capable MiG-25 Foxbat in 1967 frightened Defense Department analysts and prompted a redirection of Air Force fighter development, with high performance once again becoming the primary concern. The FX concept was eventually to emerge as the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle, a twin-engine fighter with advanced avionics and long-range missiles. Ultimately, the General Dynamics Company would develop and build a prototype ADF. It would be the F-16. The pilot's view from the cockpit of the F-16 is superlative and is unmatched by just about any other fighter aircraft. The pilot sits underneath a clamshell-type canopy whose forward and center sections are made of a single piece of polycarbonate. The ship's control system is fly-by-wire, with computers making constant adjustments in the ship's trim, leaving the pilot free to concentrate on flying and maneuvering in a dogfight, like this pilot is engaged in. The ship has no windshield arch and thus affords the pilot an unrestricted view in all directions. It makes a successful lock-on for his missiles much easier. The heads-up display, or HUD, is designed to allow the pilot to keep his opponent in view at all times while checking out his instrumentation. When he has a positive lock, he will hear a loud beeping in his helmet headphones and a light will flash on the HUD. Visibility from the cockpit covers a full 360 degrees in the horizontal and from 15 degrees down over the nose through the vertical and back to directly behind. In March of 1982, it was announced that the Air Force's Thunderbirds flight demonstration team would trade in its T-38 Talons for F-16 Fighting Falcons. Transition to the F-16 was completed in November of 1982, with the first public demonstration being flown in April of 1983. In March of 1985, the team re-equipped with Block 15 F-16As, plus one F-16B, which is used for media orientation flights. The space normally used for the gun on the F-16 is taken up by an oil tank, which is used to make smoke during air show demonstrations. Fast crossover brakes are always a crowd favorite at air shows. The Air Force's Thunderbirds are a big asset in its recruitment efforts. Who can resist thinking about being in the cockpit of one of these frontline fighters while watching a Thunderbird demonstration? Only the very best of the best pilots are chosen for this duty. A tightly performed 5-point hesitation roll is an exercise in precision, an appreciation of which is even more apparent in a group formation roll. The wingtip-to-wingtip separation here is no more than a few feet at all times. This takes immense concentration on the part of the pilots involved. It is said that they expend a full day's mental energy in the space of 1 hour during the show. The precision continues even on the ground. The planes are all parked in a line with little or no variation from a straight line. Maintenance and spit and polish are always orders of the day for the Thunderbird demonstration team. The crews performing this work are also the best trained the Air Force can field. All are drawn from crack units. All the pilots and their maintenance crews have a strong attachment to their individual planes. The crews feel especially proprietary. The planes are theirs, and they just occasionally lend them to the pilots. It's a fiction the pilots are happy to go along with, because no one appreciates the maintenance crew more than the pilot it serves. Operation Deny Flight, carried out over Bosnia in 1993, while rarely involving combat, was not without its dangers. One U.S. pilot was downed by a SAM and had to hide out for almost a week before being rescued. The F-16 involved flew out of Aviano Air Base in Italy. Maintenance procedures for combat aircraft are even more important, and nothing is overlooked before a CAP, or Combat Air Patrol, including extensive briefings conducted by the squadron commander. He will elaborate on the mission parameters and changes that have come down the pike in terms of rules of engagement. He will also alert the pilots to the results of the latest recon mission that will point out any new SAM sites or gun emplacements the Serbs might have put in place since the last CAP flight. Out on the flight line, an F-16 pilot will also do an extensive walk-around of his airplane. Not because he doesn't trust his maintenance or ordnance people, but simply because he is the one who is ultimately responsible for the mission and has the most to lose if it goes awry. He also gives his outboard Sidewinder missile and its connections a glance. This is his primary air-to-air short-range missile, but he won't use it unless confronted by another fighter in the skies over Bosnia. On February 18, 1994, 2 Air Force F-16Cs shot down 4 Serbian Galeb fighters over Bosnia-Herzegovina. This was the first offensive action ever performed by NATO warplanes. The F-16 is powered by one Pratt & Whitney turbofan, rated at 12,240 pounds of thrust dry, 14,670 pounds of thrust full military, and 23,830 pounds of thrust with afterburners. Its maximum speed is Mach 2.05 at 40,000 feet. The F-16 armament includes a 20mm cannon with 515 rounds. An AIM 9L Sidewinder air-to-air missile can be carried at each wingtip. There are 3 hardpoints for external stores underneath each wing, plus a centerline point. In the long-range intercept role, the aircraft can carry an AIM 7 Sparrow or AIM 120A AMRAAM on each outboard underwing station. A 300 US gallon drop tank can be carried on the centerline station, and a slightly larger one can be carried on each inboard underwing pylon. The F-16 can now fly and fight at night, as well as in any type of weather. The ship is just about the lightest in the U.S. arsenal in terms of weight. With afterburners on, the ship's engine puts out awesome power. G-force buildup on many maneuvers is almost more than the human pilot can stand. It's the main reason he sits at a 30-degree incline in his cockpit. It was found that this angle offers the best practical means of distributing G-forces over the pilot's body and will help him stay conscious and in control during high-speed maneuvers. During the early design development of the F-16, General Dynamics had considered both single and twin vertical tails. Wind tunnel tests had shown that vortices produced by the four-body strake generally improved directional stability, but that certain strake shapes actually reduced stability at high angles of attack when twin tails were used. It was concluded that a twin-tail format would result in significantly greater development risks, and that a single vertical tail would give satisfactory results provided that it was sufficiently tall. Four different wing plan forms, straight, swept, variable, and delta, were reviewed. The variable geometry wing was rejected because of its high weight and complexity. The delta wing had the advantage of low weight per unit of area and low wave drag, but was ultimately rejected because of its high drag at lift and trim drag penalties. A low sweep straight wing was finally chosen because it was thought to offer the best combination of good maneuverability, high acceleration, and maximum lift to ensure good altitude performance by the new fighter. In February of 1975, a NATO consortium was offered the F-16 at a unit flyaway cost of $5.16 million, based on a total production run of 2,000 planes for the Air Force, NATO, and other countries. On June 7, 1975, armed with the assurance of an Air Force commitment to the type, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway announced that they had agreed to acquire the F-16 as a replacement for the F-104G. A total of 348 were in the initial production contract. In its new form, the F-16 offered more new technology, superior performance, and a more attractive offset production package than any of its competitors. Initially, there was some criticism of the F-16's lack of BVR, beyond visual range, and an all-weather capability, as well as some concern about the performance problems that the F-100 engine was encountering at the time. All of these initial shortcomings have been corrected in subsequent production runs with newer avionics packages. A large network of manufacturers were contracted to build the F-16 under license in Europe, while production is also ongoing at the parent General Dynamics plant in Fort Worth, Texas. The manufacture of the first production F-16 began at General Dynamics Fort Worth plant in August of 1975. The Air Force accepted its first F-16 on August 17, 1978. The first operational unit to get the F-16AB was the 388th Tactical Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, which received its first machines on January 6, 1979. In the beginning, some thought had been given to naming the F-16 Mustang II, even though the original Mustang was a North American aviation product. The name Condor was also considered. On July 21, 1980, the Air Force announced that the official name of the F-16 would be Fighting Falcon, which was the mascot of the Air Force Academy. The prefix was considered necessary in order to avoid litigation by Dassault Aviation, which marketed an executive jet with the name Falcon, as well as to avoid confusion with the Hughes Falcon air-to-air missile. Pilots and ground crews almost never use the full name, usually referring to the F-16 simply as the Falcon. The unofficial name Viper is quite often used for the F-16, as well as the electric jet, a reference to the fly-by-wire flight control system. Aviano Air Base is one of the principal NATO air bases in the region of the Adriatic Sea. Its location is very handy for supporting NATO actions in the Balkans when they become necessary, as they did recently with deny flight over Bosnia. If the situation in Kosovo is not resolved soon by negotiation, Aviano's F-16s will be tasked once again with airstrikes on the Serbs. The F-16AB was the first production version of the Fighting Falcon, the A being the single-seat version and the B being the two-seat version. Aside from the second seat, the A and B versions are essentially identical and have the same performance envelope and armaments fit. But however it's configured, the Fighting Falcon is a tough little bird that can turn with almost any other fighter it's likely to meet. Only the FA-18 Hornet has a tighter turning radius in a dogfight and more power to get out of one if it needs to. But the F-16 is the one aircraft in the U.S. Air Force arsenal that still provides the most bang for the buck. This ship is the F-16D version, the latest two-seater to come online. Its twin, the single-seat C version, are identical in all other respects. Both have the latest avionics packages and were first introduced in 1984. They are the versions that answered all the earlier NATO complaints about lacking all-weather capabilities in a BVR system. The new BVR, or Beyond Visual Range system, fires the AIM-7 Sparrow, and now the later developed AIM-120 AMRAAM. The earlier deficiencies of the AB versions had been particularly obvious in operations over Europe, where the weather is generally bad much of the time. This is a map of Italy and the Balkans, showing their close proximity, and what makes Aviano Air Base such an attractive NATO outpost. F-16 flight crews study the region carefully because it's their exclusive province in the peacekeeping rules. F-16 pilots are young for the most part, with 20/20 vision. They have to be to withstand the G-force buildup in the aircraft during combat maneuvers. The Falcon, of course, is air refuelable, as is most of the Air Force fleet these days. It allows for a continuous cap mounted over the no-fly regions of Bosnia and now Iraq in the Middle East following Operation Desert Storm. Most of the refueling systems are set up with the flying boom off a KC-135 tanker. Its operator has a tail vantage point in the tanker that allows him to line up the boom visually with a thirsty aircraft coming up for an aerial refill. It's a delicate operation, requiring skill and good hand and eye coordination on the part of the men in both airplanes. The transfer begins once the socket connection is complete and locked in. The ferry range for the F-16 with drop tanks is over 2,100 miles, but the tanks inhibit the ship's maneuverability in a combat situation. So in circumstances where the ship has to be ready for anything at any moment, aerial refueling is the only option for an extended cap. Another F-16 lines up off the tanker's port bow to let the tanker pilot know he's got another customer waiting for a refill. One F-16 is now topped off and ready for another long-range cap. And his wingman will now take his place and tap into the tanker's fuel supply. The F-16 pilot sits on a McDonnell Douglas Aces II, advanced concept ejection seat, rocket-powered, and equipped with a vectored thrust pitch control system. It's capable of 0-0 performance and is cleared for use up to a height of 50,000 feet and a speed of 600 knots. There is some debate over how much the seat's 30-degree incline actually does protect the pilot from G-force. It certainly makes it more difficult for him to turn his head to check the 6. Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm demanded a huge buildup of coalition forces on the sands of Saudi Arabia in a very short period of time. Iraq, under its dictator Saddam Hussein, had invaded Kuwait and ignored the United Nations ultimatum to vacate forthwith or pay the price. The coalition was about to hand him a hefty bill. Blowing sands on the desert made the job of maintenance for all the airplanes, vehicles, and guns a constant headache. Visibility on the ground and up to 1,000 feet was sometimes difficult, but it was tough to keep the grit and dust out of delicate mechanisms in the face of a sandstorm. Desert Storm was aptly named, and not just from a military standpoint. The F-16 was the most ubiquitous aircraft of Desert Storm, with many of the participating NATO countries flying it. Most of the time, it was used in the ground attack mode, especially since Iraq's Air Force hightailed it out of the country to Iran. Saddam knew his small Air Force was outmatched, and he was going to spare as many of his planes from destruction as he could. What he had not thought about was Iran's decision to confiscate all of them. Iran and Iraq had just finished a bitter decade-long war over control of the Shat al-Ab waterway, with both sides exhausted and neither the winner. It was just one in a long line of dumb decisions made by the Iraqi leader throughout the conflict, beginning with his original invasion of Kuwait. F-16s went in among the first waves, led by the F-117 Nighthawk, as hostilities opened with a raid on downtown Baghdad. The F-16 was tasked with defense suppression, ranging from ammo and fuel dumps to bunker busting and tank interdiction. Throughout the war, only 5 F-16s were lost to AAA anti-aircraft fire, and 2 more due to non-combat accidents. F-16 Cs and Ds were armed with Mk-84s, 2,000-pound radar-fused bomb, as well as 20mm cannon. Often pulling off a target after bomb release, the pilots would spray the area with explosive cannon fire. The Mk-84s were set to explode about 15 feet off the ground, spraying fragments of steel in all directions. It proved effective not only for SAM sites, but troop concentrations as well. Here, a SAM site is targeted. After release, the pilot pulls up hard and fast, ready to go around again and attack with his cannon. In the beginning, the F-16s dropped from high altitude, where they had a better chance to track incoming SAMs. But it wasn't long before this precaution was deemed unnecessary, since Iraq exhausted its supply of the deadly missiles fairly quickly. A lot of them were wasted in masked, futile attacks at the start of the conflict. The F-16s were able to avoid these en masse attacks, but the pilots had some hairy moments as they watched the missiles' comm trails all around them. The problem wasn't so bad over Bosnia, although unlike the Gulf, one F-16 was hit on its blind side directly underneath the ship and the pilot forced to bail out. The whole Bosnia business could reawaken if the freedom fighters of Kosovo and the Yugoslav Serbs cannot reach an agreement on autonomy for the region, where ethnic Albanians outnumber Serbs by 90%. The Serbs have been up to their old tricks in slaughtering civilians in this new round of Balkan fighting. The NATO base at Aviana will be heavily tasked with responding to the crisis if the command structure decides to intervene. And it will be the F-16 Fighting Falcon which will be in the vanguard of any new airstrikes.
The Panavia Tornado is one of the most impressive and effective aircraft of the modern era. It comes in bomber, fighter, maritime attack and reconnaissance versions. It's true to say that since the mid-1980s, Tornado has become the backbone of NATO's European air forces. And it looks set to continue that way well into the 21st century. The thinking behind the Panavia Tornado dates back to the early 1960s. Since the late 50s, the British Royal Air Force had provided the bulk of NATO's European deterrent bomber force in the shape of the 3 V bomber types. But these aircraft had been built as high-altitude bombers. In 1960, after the shooting down of Gary Power's U-2 spy plane, new tactics had to be developed. The V-bombers found themselves operating under all the rigours of low-level flight. One by one, they began to suffer from structural fatigue brought on by the stresses of low flying. It soon became obvious that purpose-built low-level bombers were what was required. Two major Europe-wide decisions now had a profound effect on future military strategy. First, it was obvious that the European nations alone could never sustain a major war against the Soviet bloc. So most of Western Europe resorted to collective security, relying heavily on the American military presence. Second, most European countries decided not to increase their defence budgets. Britain, however, chose to go it alone. It designed and produced an advanced low-level nuclear strike aircraft which could respond to a Soviet advance across Central Europe. This aircraft, the TSR-2, would perhaps have been the most advanced bomber in the world, had it not been for a combination of aircraft industry bickering and spiralling costs. TSR-2 was a bold design created by the best brains in British aviation. Vickers Aviation, English Electric and the Bristol Aeroplane Company had merged to form the British Aircraft Corporation. And this collective newcomer to the scene set about producing a large, shoulder-wing, tactical strike reconnaissance aircraft, hence TSR, that could fly at high supersonic speeds and even reach Mach 1 at ultra-low level. In 1963, 30 TSR-2s were ordered at the unbelievably high cost for the time of £690 million. It was much more than any British defence programme had cost before. To make matters worse, virtually all of the rest of the British aircraft industry had merged to form a second major conglomerate called Hawker Siddeley. In 1965, in a gritty atmosphere of inter-company squabbling and rocketing costs, the new British Labour government cancelled the whole project. To fill the gap, the American General Dynamics F-111 swing wing bomber was ordered, and then that was cancelled as well. Finally, the RAF was given 2 aircraft as stopgap replacements, the American McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom fighter bomber and the British Blackburn Buccaneer. That had been purpose-built for the Royal Navy as a low-level strike bomber. The cancellation of TSR-2 had a major effect on the British aircraft industry. Demonstrated clearly that Britain could not compete alone against the American aviation industry giants. In fact, it became obvious that no European nation could produce a major aviation project by itself. This realization spurred the European aircraft industry into cooperation and joint working. The development of an Anglo-French supersonic airliner was already well underway. It was one of the few projects that had survived those widespread cuts of the previous decade. It was joined by an Anglo-French fighter bomber design called Jaguar. The strength of the Jaguar concept was to prove itself many years later in the close support of ground forces involved in the Gulf War. So this was the background to the development of the multirole combat aircraft, the MRCA, that would become Tornado. The early thinking that eventually led to the MRCA was actually about a replacement for the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. Britain was not involved at this stage because the Royal Air Force had never been equipped with F-104s. But these thought processes took an unexpected turn when the emphasis moved towards a requirement for bombing and reconnaissance. Now Britain began to take an interest. From the outset, the cost was supremely important. Two important design considerations meant that the aircraft would only need to be about half the weight and size of the TSR-2, so it would be substantially cheaper. The two differences were that the wings would have variable sweepback and the weapons would be carried externally. By the time the final requirements for the aircraft were drawn up, many of the original prospective partners had pulled out. The result was a tri-national concern called Panavia Aircraft. It was run by Britain, Germany and Italy. The main contractors were the British Aircraft Corporation, BAC, Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm of Germany, MBB, and Air Italia. On the 14th of August 1974, the first of 9 MRCA prototypes flew in Germany. The first aircraft was then used to assess general handling and performance, and later prototypes went on to test all of the facets of an advanced modern strike aircraft. By the time Tornado GR1s entered service with the RAF in 1982, the aircraft had developed into the most advanced interdictor strike aircraft in production in Europe. It was truly multi-role. Tornado was intended to cover virtually anything that was asked of it, with the sole exception of dedicated air combat. It was expected to take on counter-air operations against airfields, interdiction over the battlefield, close air support, reconnaissance, and even maritime attack, and to do all of those things in all weathers. To fulfill all of those roles, Tornado has to remain undetected by flying at high speed and low level. It protects itself with a selection of self-defense aids, and it's capable of delivering a wide range of weapons. The speed comes from 2 Rolls-Royce RB199 turbofans. They give Tornado a maximum speed of Mach 2.2 in level flight above 36,000 feet, but they can also deliver supersonic speed at ultra-low level. To get under enemy radar, Tornado has automatic terrain-following radar. Low-level attack avionics allow it to press home attacks at night and in conditions that would ground many other combat aircraft. As part of its defense capabilities, Tornado carries electronic countermeasure systems either in pods under the wings or internally. And perhaps most importantly for a multi-role aircraft, Tornado's variable geometry wings provide a high degree of strike effectiveness. For low-level flight at high speed, the wings are swept fully back. Mid-sweep works best when agility and maneuverability are required. Forward sweep is used for short takeoffs and landings. And with the wings fully forward and using the reverse thrust of the engines, Tornado needs less than 3,000 feet of landing run. That means it can land on short runways or even on stretches of road. It's also able to use parts of damaged airfields and dispersed bases. After a sortie, a Tornado can be turned around in about 40 minutes, even when targets are changed. They can actually change a complete engine within that time as well. Tornado has two cockpits. The pilot flying the aircraft and monitoring the systems sits at the front. The navigator is also the weapons systems operator, and he or she sits at the back. The navigator loads the mission data into the computer systems, and then, by operating the screens on either side of the radar, he or she has control over the mission route plan. During a mission, the navigator also controls all the air-to-ground weapons. Laser and radar ranging provide the accuracy that's needed for delivering weapons. That was amply demonstrated in 1984, when crews from 617 Squadron won the prestigious bombing and navigation competition that's run by the US Air Force. That kind of accuracy means that on operations, most attacks are successful in a single pass. A full 10 years before the arrival of the GR-1, the RAF had realised that its UK Air Defence Force was becoming obsolete. The mainstay in the fighter world was the English Electric Lightning, which relied on 1950s technology. The force had been bolstered by the arrival of the Phantom, but that too had its problems, mostly because the government had insisted that it should be re-engined with the Rolls-Royce Spey. It didn't prove as successful as they'd hoped. Many American fighters were considered and tested, but none was suitable for the specific needs of NATO's strategy. The requirement was for an aircraft that could carry medium-range air-to-air missiles. It should have a look-down, shoot-down radar system, and it should be capable of long-range combat air patrol. Tornado seemed to fit the bill, especially as it could be refueled in flight. So when the first production GR-1s were ordered, 3 prototypes of an air defence variant, the ADV, were commissioned at the same time. The basic design of the aircraft was the same, but there were different avionics and weapons. The Tornado F3 is part of a secure information system that provides data from a wide area supplied by airborne early warning aircraft. Like the GR-1, the F3 is armed with a 27mm Aden gun, but it also carries 2 types of air-to-air missiles. For medium-range attacks, there are 4 Skyflash missiles with classic AIM-9L sidewinders for short-range use. Although the aircraft were built by the same tri-national consortium as the bombers, only the RAF and subsequently the Royal Saudi Air Force ordered them. The next version of the Tornado is the GR-1A, the reconnaissance variant. Otherwise known as the ECR, for Electronic Combat and Reconnaissance, the GR-1A uses an emitter location system to detect and identify enemy radar. The ECR Tornadoes carry AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missiles, and more recently, the Advanced Long-Range Anti-Radiation Missiles, HARM and ALARM for short. Both of them are dedicated to destroying enemy radars. Tornado was originally developed to counter the threat from the Soviet Union. The battlefield would have been the great central plains of Europe, where it was expected that Soviet tanks would roll across the frontier into West Germany. They'd have been supported by Soviet aircraft, and it was the mounting airfields for those aircraft that would have been amongst the Tornado targets. But in 1989, everything changed. The breakup of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism led to profound changes in NATO's defence policy. Almost overnight, the main enemy was seeking peace, and the whole basis for the West's thinking had become redundant. The British government sought to take advantage of the so-called peace dividend by drastically reducing its defence expenditure. Reductions were proposed that would cut the size of the RAF to its lowest level for 50 years. The plan, called Options for Change, was presented to Parliament on the 25th of July 1990. 1 week later, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces seemed poised to take over the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and thus strangle the West's oil supplies. As the United Nations passed resolutions condemning the act of aggression, British and American air bases prepared to rush reinforcements to Saudi Arabia and deter further Iraqi incursions. The priority was to send fighters and airborne early warning aircraft. On the 11th of August 1990, RAF Tornado F-3 fighters landed at Dhahran in Saudi Arabia. They immediately began flying combat air patrols along the Kuwait border. At that point, the coalition forces were vastly outnumbered by the Iraqi Air Force. That was equipped with highly capable Soviet-built MiG-29s, MiG-25s, and French Mirage F-1s. Over a period of 4.5 months, coalition forces in the Gulf were built up on a massive scale. The American code name for this reinforcement was Operation Desert Shield. The RAF's contribution was called Operation Granby. Tornado was the backbone of the RAF in the Gulf. The 18 F-3 fighters were soon joined by a formidable force of 62 GR-1 bombers. The Middle East was a vastly different operating environment from the Northern European theatre where so many RAF aircrew had trained to fight. However, their training had emphasised flexibility. They were ready for the tasks ahead. One thing that was still important for the Tornado crews was low-level training. But now, in a complete change from their former German environment, their speed and their noise were unrestricted. They flew at high subsonic speeds, hugging the sand dunes to stay below that lethal enemy radar coverage. These Tornado infrared camera shots show how extreme the conditions could be. In December 1990, the United Nations passed a resolution to liberate Kuwait. When Iraq failed to comply with the UN's demands, Operation Desert Shield became Desert Storm. At 1:30 on the morning of the 17th of January 1991, Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired from US warships in the Persian Gulf. They were followed by wave after wave of coalition bombers hitting radar stations and communications. Any Iraqi aircraft that resisted was shot down if it wasn't already fleeing from the battle. The RAF Tornadoes had a special task in this vast scenario. They were to fly in at ultra-low level and destroy Iraq's airfields with the runway-busting JP-233 bombs. These bombs had been specially designed to deliver many small munitions. Some concrete-penetrating bombs would crater the runways, and then mines would hamper repair operations. But this type of attack required the aircraft to fly directly over the target. Despite the intense darkness, the heavy flak, and vicious attacks from surface-to-air missiles, most of the Tornado raids were successful. However, the scale of the anti-aircraft defences was such that 3 Tornadoes were shot down on 3 successive nights. Day 4 of the campaign brought a switch in tactics. Tornadoes went to medium-level attacks, flying at around 10,000 feet and using free-fall bombs against airfields and other targets. Playing a largely unsung combat support role, the RAF tanker force was essential to the British war effort. The tankers ensured that each combat aircraft went into action with a full fuel load, and crucially at precisely the time specified by their operational orders. Each heavily armed Tornado needed 2 refuelings on the way to its target and 1 on its way back. That meant that the tankers had to fly near or even in Iraqi airspace to wait for the returning Tornadoes. And having seen a number of aircraft go out and perhaps 1 less return, the tanker crews felt the loss of the Tornadoes just as keenly as the bomber crews themselves. One of the true success stories of the Gulf War was the use of precision-guided munitions, the so-called smart bombs. Back at home, viewers watching the air war on television were stunned by the accuracy with which these weapons could hit a target, apparently without any damage to the surrounding area. Some of the most enduring images of the war were those of laser-guided bombs going down ventilation shafts. RAF Tornadoes began to drop laser-guided bombs, LGBs for short, on the 2nd of February 1991, some 2 weeks into the campaign. LGBs detect the splash of laser light reflected off the target, that light coming originally from an airborne laser designator. Initially, the veteran Buccaneer provided this service for the Tornadoes. The Tornado-Buccaneer duo became deadly, hitting bridges and hardened air shelters and even Iraqi runways with unerring accuracy. 8 days later, the Tornado Force became operational with its own airborne laser designator, the GEC Marconi Tiled Pod, Thermal Imaging Airborne Laser Designator, that stands for. Once air superiority had been established, the plan called for air attacks on tactical targets to soften up the battlefield prior to the land campaign. RAF Jaguars attacked the Iraqi army in Kuwait. As fighter bombers in the Second World War had harried German forces, so the Jaguars blew up ammunition dumps and fuel stores, missile sites and tanks. At 0400 on the 24th of February, the coalition ground troops moved in. The land campaign was swift, around 100 hours. The Iraqi army surrendered. Kuwait had been liberated. Even today, years after the end of the war, controversy still rages about the direct low-level attacks on airfields. The RAF lost 6 Tornadoes, 3 of them in these attacks. The runway-busting bombs had proved effective, but it still seemed a high price to pay for success. The need for increased flexibility was one of the key lessons of the Gulf War for the RAF, and it would not be long before the lessons were put to good use. In 1993, the United Nations ordered the policing of the skies over Bosnia-Herzegovina, an independent state recreated out of the breakup of Yugoslavia, which had descended into civil war. As part of Operation Deny Flight, Tornado F-3s were sent to fly over Bosnia from their base in southern Italy, thus denying the Serbian aggressors the ability to launch their aircraft against Bosnian targets. But this time, there was no clear political directive about prosecuting a war. Ceasefires came and went, and frantic political efforts to end the conflict peacefully. It was all to no avail. By the summer of 1995, it was time for the UN to take direct action against the Serbs with Operation Deliberate Force. Serb gunnery positions and ammunition depots and communications installations were the targets for precision bombing. Once again, the laser-guided bombs showed their value in taking out key targets. More recently, the RAF and the Luftwaffe have received new versions of the Tornado. The GR-1B, a maritime attack aircraft, uses the German MBB Cormoran and the British Aerospace Sea Eagle anti-ship missiles. They're launched at standoff range, and they then home onto the target with their built-in radar seekers. Finally, the RAF is expecting to receive the new GR-4 bomber version with its so-called midlife update to the original GR-1. It'll have GPS navigation, improved weapon systems including Paveway 3, that's the latest generation of US laser-guided bombs. There's also a new head-up display and a new under-nose forward-looking infrared system. The GR-4 will also be completely tiled capable, so it won't need other aircraft to provide laser designation. The penalty for all of this is that it loses its terrain-following radar. More than 900 Tornadoes have been built. They continue to provide NATO, the Royal Air Force, the Luftwaffe and the Italian Air Force with top-quality frontline aircraft. The recent changes will ensure that Tornado stays in service well into the 21st century as a proven combat aircraft in all of its many and varied roles.